Anne used to trust her neighbours until she woke up to the sound of something screaming. This wasn't the first time she'd been awoken in the middle of the night to something loud and obnoxious. The yelling of drunks or the screeching of the local raccoon were a frequent misery during the night. Something was off about the scream, though. She could tell. Blinking the tiredness out of her eyes, she looked around her rather small bedroom. It was dark, save the light from the street, and someone was screaming. It definitely was a someone. Raccoons didn't scream so horribly. She moved from under her covers, frantically tying her dressing gown before trying to concentrate on where the scream was emanating. The source wasn't inside the apartment, thank God, but she could tell it was nearby. She walked to the doorway to turn on the light, the scream persisting. She, her panic now rising, moved to the window to look and see if the screams were coming from the street. Maybe it was just a raccoon after all. It wasn't, of course. There was a woman, screaming, agonized, hunched over the figure of a man. His arm was punching into the woman's side, and every time it landed, her screaming became even more pitched. Anne couldn't take her eyes off of what was happening. A man was stabbing a woman in the middle of the street. A man was stabbing a woman in the middle of the street. She frantically scanned the rest of the drive, looking, hoping for someone to arrive and save her, for a neighbor to step in and stop the madness from continuing. To her left, she saw nothing but an empty street. To her right, a car, blissfully unaware, passed the neighboring road. No one was coming. She glanced to the windows across the way. She saw other lights, other windows like hers, other people looking on. As the woman screamed louder and louder, Anne saw outlines standing stock still. Her neighbors, seeing a woman being murdered in cold blood, were standing and watching. She wondered if they had called the police yet. Surely, someone had, surely. Why wouldn't they do anything? Why wouldn't she? Why wouldn't she? She wasn't doing anything. It's all she could think about as the screams grew fainter and fainter. But she had to move. Surely she had to move. Surely if she kept waiting, the poor woman would die. The man would escape. It could happen again. Her phone was in the living room. All she had to do was call the police. She beheld once more the violent struggle, but all she found was a woman lying in the street. No one else could be seen. She ran to her phone. It was horrific, the poor thing. Caught in the middle of the street, stabbed. I've never heard of something so terrible. It's the overcrowding, I tell you. Put too many people in one place, it's bound to happen. Anne couldn't bear to eavesdrop on any more of the conversation as the fancy-looking men walked across the street, happily chatting about how fantastic the hindsight was. Sitting at the doorstep to her apartment, she looked to the spot that held her attention in rapt horror the previous night. She was thinking about what she'd done, what she'd not done. The same thought had been on a loop in her head for hours. If she'd just ran to the phone, as soon as she'd heard screaming, maybe the man would have been caught. Maybe the poor woman would have still been alive. But then again, that wasn't really the thing that was gripping her thoughts. No. What was troubling her most was the knowledge that just across the street, in apartments just like hers, were people who did the exact same thing. People who did nothing. She'd always thought of her neighbors as friendly, as people she could perhaps trust. But as she looked through each parted curtain, watching people eat their breakfast, play with their kids, read books, she shuddered. It wasn't an attacker she was afraid of. She was afraid that no one would care. She was afraid that no one would come to her rescue, because her neighbors were just like her.